If everything in China could potentially be monitored, do people have like intimate conversations?
Peppa Pig, which is such a innocent cartoon character. It was scrubbed off the internet as well because they were saying that this is not good for the Chinese youth.
Loads of Hollywood films get censored in China. Remember Top Gun Maverick? There was huge controversy when the Taiwanese and Japanese flags were quietly edited away from Tom Cruise's jacket in the trailer. And Bohemian Rhapsody, pretty much all the gay scenes were cut out. And it was the same with that scene from Fantastic Beasts: The Secrets of Dumbledore. So going to the cinema in China is a whole different experience. And it's not just the movies. It's the same for the internet, foreign music, video games. So today you're going to hear why censorship is so tight in China. I'm Hannah. This is What in the World from the BBC World Service. And with me here in the studio is Sean Yuan from the BBC's Global China Unit. Hey.
Hello, Hannah.
So you grew up in China. What was that like? Were you aware of this censorship?
I never really noticed there was censorship. That was how effective
normal.
it was. Exactly. And for example, here they have TikTok and they have Instagram, they have YouTube, they have Google, all those things that be readily accessible to them. But for me, growing up, we didn't have those things. No, even up until now, there's still no Instagram, there's no Google, there is no YouTube, and there's no Facebook. There's pretty much all the social media apps you can think of right now off the top of your head. We don't have that in China, and we have the Chinese equivalent of those apps. But that just comes and shows that how tightly controlled the Chinese internet is, and how effective it has been in a way that people don't even think about censorship anymore because it is the way of life.
Was there anything that you really wanted to see, like a movie or a hit song that you were desperately trying to get hold of?
Everything.
What was the one thing that you remember being like, I can't get hold of this?
Everything. My God, Lady Gaga, for example.
Oh, yeah.
I want to see her videos. And, she was viral and, back in the days, and everyone was talking about her. And I remember having to find out how to evade the censorship in order to watch this video. So that's just a very small example.
And Lady Gaga, that's because of her links to the Dalai Lama.
That's right. She met with Dalai Lama a few years ago, the spiritual leader of Tibetan Buddhism, who's in exile right now. And it's obviously one of the more sensitive topics in China. And the fact that Lady Gaga, being an international star, met with Dalai Lama, that sort of triggered the Beijing's response.
And let's talk about some of the other big topics. Taiwan, the Tiananmen Square protests, all of these major topics that you just can't talk about at all.
Yeah, for example, the protest in Hong Kong back in 2019, the anti-extradition bill. And you have the Taiwan issue, of course. Tiananmen Square, for example, it was one of the events that had been scrubbed off from Chinese online and textbook memory, which was the protest, a student protest back in 1989 that ended up in with a massacre on Tiananmen Square. That's one of the more important topics that are being censored on Chinese internet.
What is China trying to achieve with this level of censorship? Obviously, it's trying to rewrite history.
I think the most important thing for the Chinese government to do is to assert some sort of dominance in order to sort of restore stability. It says instability as the core reason why Soviet Union fell, for example. And Xi Jinping himself, he went through those periods. He understood exactly what instability could do to the society. And that's the reason why he personally was very invested in making sure that the entire country stay the way it is.
He doesn't want people to mobilize, and the internet is just the most amazing tool for planning protests. I mean, look at the Arab Spring. There have been countless movements, governments that have been toppled because of protests and movements that have been organized online. Are there any topics that you think, would have been banned, but actually, weirdly, you can still access?
Yeah, sure. Like, for example, we're just talking about, like stability, right? We're talking about how he wants to assert dominance, how he wants to make sure there's no massive movement. I'm not saying that criticism towards the government is completely out of reach and it's completely not tolerated. Actually, in most of the times, your criticism towards local government, for example, is not just tolerated, sometimes it's been promoted in a way that, direct your anger towards this specific official at a very low-level government. It's sort of like pressure valve. So, for example, we've had a lot of examples in the past few years where local government officials being accused of corruption, for example, bribery, and all those things. The Chinese internet would actually actively encourage Chinese netizens to talk about them. But if your criticism is targeted towards, like, for example, Xi Jinping himself or central government, and that runs the risk of mobilizing a bigger population, then sure, that would be censored.
That's such a clever strategy. I'd never thought of that. And especially if, there is low-level government corruption and then the high-level government comes and cuts it off, then they seem to be doing the right thing. So
Exactly.
actually it works in their favor
It works
after
perfectly
all.
for them, yeah.
And on a daily basis, can you talk me through how this censorship actually works? I mean, let's start with the Great Firewall of China.
That is one of the most important inventions that the Chinese government has put out when it comes to internet censorship. It was put out many, many years ago already, and more than a decade. And every year has been, not just every year, almost on a daily basis, it's been upgraded to filter out more content, to block more VPNs, for example. What it does essentially is that they block all the major websites that the government would deem to be a cause for concern for them, when it comes to instability and all that. BBC, for example, is blocked, and now, as we said earlier, all Meta-related websites, Facebook, Instagram, for example, WhatsApp, we cannot use either, and you have YouTube as well, of course. Literally, quite like if you look at your phone right now. Honestly, if I pull out my phone right now, the first screen, all the apps I'll be using right now, none of them will work in China with this Great Firewall, right? Chinese companies got this opportunity to promote their own products. So you don't have Google Maps, but we have Baidu Maps, for example, we have Gaode Maps.
Business opportunity.
Exactly. And we don't have WhatsApp, but we have WeChat. Exactly. Those things do exist. It's also part of the tool of censorship, because WhatsApp, for example, at least it's end-on-end encryption, whereas WeChat is not. And everything could be monitored on WeChat. So by banning those apps and introducing local apps, they're giving people an alternative for sure. But those tools are also giving them a chance to kind of have a back channel to assert more censorship as well.
If everything in China could potentially be monitored, do people have intimate conversations? Do people do dirty talk and stuff
for
on
sure.
WeChat?
I mean,
Even though the government could be listening in and looking at your
know
selfie.
that, but I guess the government has more
Bigger fish
more
to
pressing
fry.
issues to spy on
That
than
is the
just
first thing that came to my mind. Absolute filth.
So just going back to in terms of the Great Firewall, in terms of how censorship works, that you have the Great Firewall, but also there are individual censors who would sit behind the computer and filter through the keywords and manually delete posts. And then, of course, we now have AI and the algorithm that they can use using AI to censor out certain keywords, for example, is a cause for concern for a lot of people.
It's so much more powerful, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
quicker.
Much quicker. Because previously you have to kind of use very specific keywords and you search them. And then Chinese netizens, they are very savvy, right? And they change those keywords to codes or meme images and all that. And then people have to get the censor have to keep up. Whereas for AI, after being trained by the mass machine learning, they can identify those kind of alternations of original content very easily.
And it's not just political topics, is it? Like I mentioned, culture is also heavily censored. What are some of the things that have been censored for non-political reasons?
Well, first of all, everything is political in China. It could be the Chinese government is very good at masking everything as political, so they have good reason to sort of control it. But just on the surface level, for example, Peppa Pig, which is such a innocent cartoon character. It was scrubbed off the internet as well because they were saying that this is not good for the Chinese youth. Just last year, I think, there was a ban on effeminate male characters on TV and movies and all that because they are trying to sort of promote the masculine standard of men, and there were some movies or TV shows that kind of were portraying a more feminine side of masculinity, and they did not like it.
They're very anti-LGBT.
Very, very much so. Yeah.
And you said when you were growing up in China, you were really frustrated you couldn't get hold of Lady Gaga's latest music videos and all this other stuff. What do ordinary Chinese citizens make of the censorship? Do they accept it as part and parcel of daily life, or are people angry?
It depends on who you talk to. if I talk to my parents, for example, to my grandparents, they probably still don't know the existence of censorship. They wouldn't know the existence of Google, for example. But for young people, it's a very different story. And a lot of people have been aware of the fact that there has been censorship. And as I said earlier, they have their ways of evading censorship. As I said earlier, like, for example, changing the content of an article they want to share to random languages, to codes, or to meme images, and all those things. So and of course VPN.
But for private networks.
Yeah, exactly. And even though the Chinese government is cracking down on those as well, like even for tech savvy people, it's getting more
harder.
difficult. Yeah.
But do people accept that there is going to be a certain level of censorship because they get an otherwise decent quality of life?
Oh, absolutely. That's such a good point. I'm just taking the U.S. as an example because of China-U.S. competition. This kind of information you get about the U.S. is mostly about the George Floyd protest, for example, and major inflation going on in the U.S. and the inauguration of Donald Trump and the January 6th and the riots, all those things. Those information is being filtered, being allowed into China to depict a picture of the U.S. being a completely chaotic place. So with that in mind, the Chinese government is giving the sort of social contract to Chinese citizens, saying that look what the U.S. is doing. Look what freedom gets you. Look what democracy gives you. By living in China, even though you might not be able to get all the freedom, quote unquote, that has been afforded to other citizens, what we're going to give you in return is stability, prosperity. And that is the core of the social contract that Chinese government is having with Chinese citizens.
And you mentioned AI and how the censorship space is changing. Is it getting stricter or more relaxed?
The thing about censorship in China is that on the surface, it is getting stricter, but at the same time, it's getting more unpredictable. I think it's part of their tool as well, because sometimes they let certain things stay online, sometimes they do not. And of course, except for this, major red flags that we know would not be able to talk about, will get censored. There are some other things, like, for example, the certain movies we're talking about, or like a certain post talking about feminism movements, Me Too movement, for example. All those things, sometimes they leave them on internet, sometimes they completely scrub them off. And that is actually quite clever on their end as well, because they are creating this very chilling effect of people self-censoring. They, by not giving them a clear guideline on what is tolerated and what is not tolerated, people sort of just revert back to kind of err on the cautious side, to be like, you know what? If I post this and if it gets censored, my account might be deleted. If I lost my WeChat account, I'm not going to be able to talk to my friends, and or my money might be lost, whatever. If that's the concern I have, I'm just not going to talk about anything. Anything that I deem sensitive, even though I don't know what the government is going to be thinking, if I think it's going to be sensitive for the government, I'm going to stop talking about it. And that's been very effective.
This censorship topic is so fascinating. It's actually a lot more complex than I thought, because I would have thought that censorship was more black and white, banning things and about control. But what I'm hearing from you is that it's actually about creating a very smart and constantly adapting filter, because you let people have certain bits of information, and then it also becomes a propaganda tool, and it does create this image, at least from within China, that things are okay, that we're doing well enough, and then maybe you will get a much more peaceful population that doesn't want to mobilize against the government.
That is a great summary. Genuinely.
Sean, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
And that's all from me. If you're in China, chances are you won't be able to watch or listen to us. But if you are anywhere else in the world, we would love to hear from you. You can drop us a comment below with any stories or ideas for things that you think we should be covering. We're also on Instagram at BBC What in the World, and we're on WhatsApp. And just in case you don't know, we're here on the BBC World Service YouTube channel twice a week in Vision, where you can see us chatting away in the studio. But we also have audio episodes that we upload 5 times a week, and you can listen to them right here on YouTube and on all the major podcast platforms. I'm Hannah. This is What in the World from the BBC World Service, and we'll see you next time.